Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reporter channel, ***. Today, an enormous number of events have taken place, so let's get started. Of course, the most important, loudest, and most intriguing news today is coming from the Sudzha Salient. Today, hundreds, if not thousands, of reports, news updates, and images are coming from this pocket, this territory that appears to have officially become a trap for the units of the armed forces of Ukraine. Take a look at the number of icons. Each one carries some information that has likely already become part of history. Without a doubt, this battle, this maneuver, and the special operation conducted by Russian units in the Sudzha Salient will go down in history alongside the Hostomel operation, and possibly even alongside the operation conducted in. Let's try to reconstruct the timeline of events, how everything happened and where this front line is generally heading. Just last night, information began to emerge about a certain operation in which Russian units reportedly managed to pass through some pipelines, land behind Ukrainian positions, and cut off Ukrainian troops from the rear. So, let's figure out what these pipelines are and what this is all about. If we look at the map, these pipelines are very easy to spot, or rather, the pipelines themselves cannot be seen because they are underground. But right here, in this section of the front line, in the fields, you can see 5 straight strips of land. These strips mark the location where the very same pipelines are buried, the pipelines that the Russian Federation used to supply gas to Europe and Ukraine before the war and before the start of the special military operation. We can observe these pipelines in more detail. Trees have grown over the area where the pipelines are located, forming these distinct strips along the pipeline line. It was along these pipelines that the Russian units moved. The pipelines continue further, and the final point of these pipelines, which were once used to pump gas, is the Sudzha gas distribution station. Here is the station. You can also see clear strips on the ground. These are the areas where construction and installation work was carried out when these pipelines were laid. Reports suggest that Russian units, saboteurs, special forces, and other specialized troops managed to use these pipelines to infiltrate behind Ukrainian lines. Some sources report that Russian soldiers were forced to remain inside these pipelines for up to 2 days, waiting for the order to begin assault operations. Here are images taken just before the assault. Russian soldiers are inside these pipelines, which are 1.5 meters, about 5 feet, in diameter, or possibly even smaller, waiting for the command. Certain sources claim that these soldiers had to stay inside the pipelines for 2 days, even though traces of gas were still present inside, gas that had previously been pumped through these pipelines. They had to breathe this strange air. There are also reports that during this time, while Russian soldiers were inside the pipelines, some of them began to panic. This operation, which involved Russian units using gas pipelines to bypass Ukrainian defenses and strike from behind, is already being described as one of the most daring and strategically important maneuvers of the conflict. Perhaps some of them even died, all this time under the cover of silence, under the cover of cold steel, cold sweat, and tense nerves, as the soldiers waited for the order to come. And then they finally received the order. You can get out, begin the operation. It was precisely at this point, which was already the main position, located between the railway and the settlements of Pervy Nyazi and Toroy Nyazi, where the Russian soldiers landed. It is reliably known that Russian units landed at this location because footage from Ukraine's objective control was published. In this footage, according to Ukrainian sources, is the exact moment when Ukrainian intelligence managed to detect the location where Russian units landed. Take a look, here's the first group. Perhaps it wasn't the first but the 5th or the 10th. Reports state that at least 100 soldiers took part in the operation at the time of landing. However, it seems that the Russian side did not stop sending in paratroopers through the pipelines. Eventually, this turned into a supply route. Soldiers would enter from one side, exit on the other side, and then secure positions on the ground. These initial landing moments, the first, possibly the second or third wave, happened within the first hours after the operation began. We can see the landing site and some smoke, possibly from Ukrainian drone and artillery strikes, as they tried to slow down the advance of Russian soldiers. But it was already too late. It was too late because the Russian units had already reached the railway line from the landing point. When Russian forces reached the railway, the Ukrainian side began launching massive artillery strikes, using the full range of calibers available to the Ukrainian units in this section of the front, including cluster munitions. However, despite all these strikes, the Russian units managed to hold their ground. If we go back to the map, the landing occurred at the point we've already discussed. From there, Russian units advanced toward the railway, where they established the first secure position. After the Russian soldiers managed to reach this section of the front by the shortest route, part of the units moved south, toward the logistics route, to the intersection of the railway and the road near the industrial zone located on the northeastern outskirts of the settlement of Sudzha. These moments were also captured in objective control footage published by the Ukrainian side. Here, cluster munitions strikes on the initial landing point. Here, heavier artillery strikes on the railway bridge, specifically targeting both the bridge and the railway itself. It seems that Ukrainian forces were trying to find some form of protection from artillery strikes. But, as I mentioned, this was the first tactical turning point. It was at this moment that the turning point in the battle for the Sudzha salient began. Imagine the situation. Russian units crossed a distance of 16 kilometers, about 10 miles, through the pipelines and, most importantly, landed behind Ukrainian formations. Formations that at the time of the landing were stationed in settlements such as Cherkaskoye Porknoy, Kositsa, as well as in Pravda, Martinovka, and Mykolovka. All of these areas were fully occupied by Ukrainian forces. And at some point, most likely on the night between March 7th and March 8th, Ukrainian troops were concentrated in the northeast, toward the settlement of Kursk, expecting a possible Russian offensive. Suddenly, artillery shells began to rain down, cluster munitions exploded, and this was happening not in front of them, but behind them. Imagine a Ukrainian soldier stationed in Martinovka who suddenly turns around and sees chaos unfolding behind him, an unknown attack. It's like a light show with every possible type of weaponry available to Ukrainian forces being fired. Naturally, he would ask himself, what's going on? And naturally, he would be informed over the radio that Russian soldiers had managed to break through the Ukrainian defenses, infiltrate the rear, and secure positions. And, of course, what do you think happened next? Naturally, the Ukrainian units, already experienced in Russian maneuvers and tactics, made the only logical decision, to retreat. But within moments, this retreat turned into a chaotic rout. Ukrainian units began to abandon their positions en masse in Kositsa, Cherkaskoye Porknoy, Pravda, and Martinovka. By the evening, footage from objective control began to surface, showing Russian soldiers entering Cherkaskoye Porknoy without encountering any significant resistance from Ukrainian forces. In these images, we can see Russian soldiers raising the first flag, the first tricolor, near the church in Cherkaskoye Porknoy. Later, similar footage appeared, but from a different angle, captured by a different camera or drone. Once again, Russian soldiers in the courtyard of the church are raising the Russian tricolor, facing virtually no resistance from the armed forces of Ukraine. This indicates that Ukrainian units and formations had already retreated far from the settlement. A large number of objective control recordings have been published, showing how a significant number of Ukrainian soldiers were taken prisoner. These soldiers were either abandoned by the Ukrainian command or simply failed to regroup in time. This entire nightmare for Ukrainian units began when those forces that started retreating naturally moved toward Sudzha, as shown on the map. The footage shows a Ukrainian tank with a Ukrainian flag attempting to move toward Sudzha. As we discussed earlier, the logistics route, the intersection of the railway and the main road, was already under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, thanks to a special group that had crawled through tunnels. Therefore, it was no longer possible for Ukrainian units to continue along this route. The only logical decision left for them was to move south toward Oktyabrskaya Street, then follow this street across the Sudzha River and the Lokhnya River toward central Sudzha and possibly even toward the state border. However, Things turned out to be far more complicated than the Ukrainian soldiers might have expected when they tried to move along these roads. Yesterday, objective control footage from the Russian Federation was published. In this footage, a Russian drone, equipped with nanotechnology and fiber optics, is seen operating in the area of the Sudzha River, flying under an entire bridge. The footage clearly shows that all the bridge supports had been mined with a large quantity of explosives. The armed forces of Ukraine had mined all the bridges in the Sudzha sector. However, the purpose of this mining was not to blow up the bridges during a retreat to slow down the withdrawal of Ukrainian soldiers. The primary goal of the mining was to prevent a Russian counteroffensive if Russian units managed to break through Ukrainian defenses and to stop Russian troops from advancing rapidly toward the border. But the Russian side acted faster than the Ukrainian forces. During the course of this operation, the Russian army blew up all the bridges over the Sudzha River. As a result, when Ukrainian units attempted to retreat along this route yesterday, they found that all the bridges along their path had been destroyed. This led to an entire Ukrainian column coming under direct fire from Russian artillery and drones, and it was completely destroyed. That's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and all the best to you.